All right, today we're going to work on just some simple if statements. If statements are really powerful things in coding. They allow us to create programs and kind of function without, the programmer being there to help with it. So for example, you think of a game, if this occurs, do this, right? If you click on this door, it opens. You can even see it in coding. If I have this right here and I say, if I click run code, it'll run the code that I have over here. So they're all programming is just built on if statements. Now we're just going to look at some basic ones. We're not going to get into if else and things like that. That'll be for a later time. We're just going to focus just on ifs, just the logic of that, and kind of look at a few different situations for that. So I'm going to make a variable. We always like to just take input here and then let it work from there. So let's say we want to do an integer. All right, so we're going to make it an integer. We're going to say we're going to ask for an input and please enter a number. Okay, so it's going to ask us for a number. And then from here, what we want to do is we want to make our if statement. We'll just kind of space down a couple lines so it's easier to see. So we're going to say if x, and let's say that it is, let's say we're going to do something like a score for something. Let's say if that score is greater than, let's say 25. Okay. If that occurs, if that score that you had is greater than 25, it's going to do something. Now notice in our if statement we have if, and then here's our variable x, and it's greater than 25. So let's say if it's 26, 27, 28, whatever, it's going to do that. And then in Python, we're going to put these colons right here. And notice where my cursor is, if I hit enter, it actually tabs over for me right away. Some programs don't do this like this, but Python does. And you have to make sure that you're tabbed over. It allows Python to recognize that after this colon, anything that's tabbed over, it's going to do something if it happens to be in that if statement, if it qualifies for that if statement. So let's just say we're going to print that and say, good score. Okay. So if we run this, what should happen is if I type in 26, it's going to say good score. Okay. Now, what if I run it again and I put 24? Well, nothing's going to happen. Later on, in a couple videos, we'll talk about using an else, and that will allow it to catch those numbers that don't qualify for this if statement. So that's basically how this works with an integer. Let's take a look at what we can do with a float. Okay, so let's go ahead and use a float. Now, so this will be a decimal number. So let's say it's greater than 25.5. Okay, so if I run the code and I put 25, nothing's going to happen because it takes this number, it says 25.0 essentially, and it's less than that number. So let's run it again, and let's say we're going to do 25.6. Okay, and now it says good score. So this is kind of how you can use integers and floats with if statements. The most important thing with the if statement really is this part right here, and the syntax for that that's really important is, obviously telling it that it's an if. You have your logic statement here, or you have your condition, not logic, your condition here. So your if x is greater than whatever number you have, then you put the colon right here and then tab over from that. If I don't tab over and I run the code, I get a syntax error. So you got to make sure that you tab over. Okay, so let's try one more. Let's say that we want to use a text. Okay, so maybe what we want to do is create a password generator. Okay, and so what we're going to do is or not a password generator, a password program to check and see if you entered the correct password. So, please enter your password. Okay. And I always leave a tab after that because over here on the right side, they're going to be entering. It doesn't smash it together. And so we're going to say if x, now this is a little bit different. We're not going to use so much greater than or equal and things like that, or greater than or less than. We're going to use an equal statement. So we're going to actually use equal. And then we're going to put some quotes in here, and we're going to say, what's our password going to be? We'll say football. Okay, so the password's football. Now notice we have two equal signs right here, okay, and we have one equal sign right here. So in coding, whenever you see one equal sign, it's basically telling it to assign the value to that. So we have X, you have this equal sign, it's really saying X is assigned the value of whatever is entered right here, okay? Then in our if statement, when we use equal, we're going to say that if X is equal to football, so if X is football, or has the value of football, we're going to say correct. Okay? And so when we run this, it'll just say correct. You have, the correct thing. So let's just go ahead and run this a second. And let's say we put in basketball. Oops. Sorry about that. Nothing happens, right? So let's go ahead and run that again. Let's say football. And now when we run that, we can say correct. Now we could add a second if statement here if we wanted to. And you can do multiple ifs like this. We're not going to use any other special kind of thing, but we're going to say, what if it's X is not equal to football? Oops. Okay, and then I got my colons here. Oh, whoa, what just happened there? That's interesting. It jumped around on me. We're going to hit colon, and then we're going to do print, and we're going to say not. Okay. Now, this works in this instance because the way this is going to work is if I type in football, it's going to register with this if, and it's going to go ahead and tell correct. If it's not football, any other word that I type in, it's going to say not correct. Okay, so if I run this, let's do basketball again. It's going to say not correct. Okay, now there are other ways to do this, and we'll get into that in later videos, but you can do multiple ifs like this. You can do a couple different ones. It does get a little tricky with the programming sometimes if you're not careful with this, and so we'll talk about that in a later video, why we're going to use different types of ifs and not just list a whole bunch of ifs like this. Because sometimes if you're not careful, you could make it so that it actually includes that. So for example, let's say I made a mistake here and I said, well, what if it's not basketball? Just accidentally, right? And so now if I type football over here, well, that's not basketball either. And so when I type football, I'm going to get correct and not correct because of the way I did this, and I messed up my logic a little bit here with the if statement. So you got to be a little bit careful with that. Just something to watch out for. We'll talk about that in later videos. Hopefully this helps you with the if statements. Really just watch the syntax. Good luck with your coding.